We all think we know the story of humanity's fall, right? Adam, Eve, a snake, a forbidden piece of fruit. It's one of the most famous stories ever told. But what if that's not the whole story? What if it's not even the main story? Well, today we're diving into the Book of Enoch. It's this ancient, incredibly controversial text that paints a totally different and, frankly, a much darker picture of our downfall. So, let's just kick things off with a huge question. What if humanity's first great sin wasn't really about a piece of fruit at all? What if the real corruption didn't come from human disobedience, but from an angelic rebellion? And what if the crime wasn't eating something forbidden, but learning something forbidden?
Okay, so on one hand, you have the story from Genesis, which, let's be honest, puts the blame squarely on us humans. But the Book of Enoch, it completely flips the script. In its version, the source of all the sin and chaos wasn't humanity at all. It was a group of rebellious angels, and their big crime wasn't just lust, which we'll get to, but it was sharing heavenly secrets, basically an illegal transfer of divine technology. And the result? Oh, it wasn't just getting kicked out of a garden. No, it led to a world so corrupt, so violent, that the only solution was a great flood to wipe the whole slate clean.
All right, so to really get this, we've got to meet the main characters in this drama. And they're a group of angels known as the Watchers.
200. That's the number you need to remember. The text says 200 of these divine beings came down from heaven. And they didn't just stumble to earth. No, they made a pact, a sworn oath on Mount Hermon to go through with their forbidden plan together.
You know, they were called Watchers for a pretty simple reason. They had one job, just one mission, to watch over humanity. That's it. They were supposed to be our guardians, our celestial protectors. But they didn't just, quit their jobs. They completely betrayed their post in the worst way possible. So their fall from grace was kind of a 1-2 punch. The first part you might have heard of. It's hinted at in Genesis 6. They looked down, saw that human women were beautiful, and, driven by lust, they took them as wives. But the Book of Enoch adds the second, and you could argue, way more destructive sin. They started teaching humanity forbidden knowledge. We're talking about eternal secrets which were in heaven. Things that mortals were never, ever supposed to know.
Okay, so let's really get into the weeds here, because this is where the story gets wild. It's not vague at all, it's incredibly specific. So what was this forbidden curriculum? What kind of knowledge was so dangerous that it literally corrupted the entire planet?
Yeah, this wasn't just some random off-the-cuff sharing of tips. This was like a full-blown organized curriculum of corruption. Each of the lead angels was like a professor of a forbidden subject. You had Azazel, who taught humanity metallurgy, how to make swords, knives, shields, which obviously led directly to war. But get this, he also taught them cosmetology, how to make jewelry, how to apply makeup, which the text connects directly to vanity and deception. Then you have their leader, Simjaza, teaching enchantments and root cuttings, basically sorcery. Others taught astrology, the signs of the stars. It was a masterclass in powers that would change the human race forever.
And the text is absolutely, stunningly clear about who to blame. It wasn't just the forbidden relationships that doomed the world. Nope. This quote points the finger directly at the teaching as the main crime. It says, the knowledge itself, specifically the stuff Azazel taught, the weapons and the vanity, is the source of all the earth's corruption.
Wow. So what happens when you mix divine secrets with human ambition and angelic lust? Well, the result wasn't just, a more sinful society. No, this toxic cocktail unleashed something genuinely monstrous upon the world, something that physically twisted creation. I'm talking about the Nephilim, the offspring of the Watchers and human women were these monstrous giants. And we're not just talking about really tall dudes. These were violent, destructive beings with an endless, insatiable hunger. They were the walking, breathing, eating embodiment of this unholy union.
And the chaos just spiraled out of control at a terrifying speed. First, the giants ate everything humans could grow or raise, all of it. When that was gone, they started eating humans. After that, they turned on the animals, just rampaging through all of creation. And then, in the most horrific final act, they started turning on each other, devouring their own flesh. The world became so violent, so nightmarish, that the screams of humanity finally reached the heavens.
But here's a truly chilling detail. Even the Great Flood couldn't totally fix the problem. The Book of Enoch gives us a fascinating and terrifying origin story for demons. See, when the giants' physical bodies were destroyed in the flood, their spirits, which were part angelic, part divine, couldn't die. So they were trapped here, on Earth, and they became the first evil spirits, destined to torment humanity forever, long after their physical forms were gone.
Okay, so this all brings us to the absolute core question of this whole story, doesn't it? Why was this knowledge forbidden? I mean, is learning how to work with metal inherently evil? Is studying the stars a sin? Or is there something deeper going on here?
And what's so fascinating is that the Book of Enoch actually answers this for us. And the answer is that knowledge itself isn't necessarily evil. In fact, later in the book, the prophet Enoch himself gets taken on this incredible tour of heaven by the good angels, and they teach him all sorts of cosmic secrets, astronomy, how the calendar works, weather patterns. So what's the difference? Well, it all comes down to two things: permission and purpose. Enoch's knowledge was authorized, a gift from God, meant to bring righteousness and order. The Watcher's knowledge was stolen. It was shared without permission for totally selfish reasons, and it only led to destruction. It was never about what was being taught. It was all about the how and the why.
Now, if we step back and look at this with a historical lens, scholars have some really interesting theories. One idea is that this story is basically a polemic, a kind of theological attack. Think about it. A lot of these so-called forbidden arts, like astrology, enchantments, were huge parts of powerful neighboring cultures, like in Mesopotamia and Babylon. So by saying, hey, that knowledge is from fallen angels, the ancient Jewish writers could have been drawing a sharp line in the sand between their beliefs and everyone else's. Of course, it's also just a powerful cautionary tale about what happens when you seek knowledge without divine approval. And it provides one heck of a supernatural explanation for why the world got so bad that a flood was needed.
And in the end, the Book of Enoch leaves us with this really powerful, kind of uncomfortable thought. I mean, we live in a world that is all about the nonstop pursuit of more information, more knowledge, right? But this ancient text just slams on the brakes and forces us to ask about the source, the motive, and the consequences of what we learn. It throws this timeless, challenging question right in our faces. Is all knowledge good? And if it's not, who gets to decide? Who draws that line between the knowledge that elevates us and the knowledge that could destroy us?